Thank you so much, Gonzalo. Thank you, Nora and Ivona. And thank you, ITDP, for the space, for the invitation, and for all the collaborations and partnerships we've had over the years, and especially for this project, Macro Periférico, in the Metropolitan Area of Guadalajara in the state of Jalisco. As Gonzalo mentioned, this has been a groundbreaking project in our history of mobility, especially in the metropolitan area of Guadalajara. This is a comprehensive project, holistic project that went beyond transport and actually took into account holistic urbanization. So I see that Patty Martinez is on the call. That's great. Let me introduce her before I give her the floor. Oh, Patty, yes, you can go ahead. Hello, good morning. Thank you, Rene. Good morning, everyone. So I'd like to start by introducing the background and where the need was created to build this infrastructure for public transport. Next slide, please. So this has been the evolution of mobility in the city of Guadalajara. We are 2.5 million citizens, and half of the population of the state of Jalisco live in the metropolitan area of Guadalajara. So we're 8 million total in the state. In 1989, we inaugurated, the first public transport line was inaugurated, and 6 years later, the second line was inaugurated, so in 1994. In 2008, the first cycling infrastructure was built, which is on the road of Federalismo, a very important road in the city. In 2009, we had the first BRT line in the Independencia Road, and this was also a very important moment for the city's mobility. It was at this time that we started to talk about an actual network. However, at some point we paused due to public investment and decided to build more BRT lines, and so more investment was needed to revamp the vehicle fleet. So there was a pause in 2009 for public transport investment. 2010 was a very important year because the active mobility agenda started to become a priority in the city, and this became the first master plan for non-motorized vehicles in the metropolitan area. And this is the first agreement between government, civil society, and academia. This is the agreement that we follow for our active mobility policy. In 2014, we started the public cycling project, the MiBici project, and this entailed a very interlinked partnership between different actors. That's why here I'd like to highlight that from 2010 to 2014, there was a void for investment. However, in 2014, the agenda mobility started gaining more strength, especially for the cycling infrastructure. In 2018, we see an expansion of line 1. However, we started to see more investment in public transport in 2020 when line 3 is inaugurated. Line 3 is a route that connects the municipality of Zapopan to the municipality of Tlaquepaque, going through the municipality of Guadalajara. So line 3 connects 3 main points, 3 historical points of the 3 cities. This third line also allowed us, as you can see on the image, to have it raised and to regain public space. This also allowed us to transform certain areas in the city of Guadalajara, where we managed to close to vehicles a very important street. And this also changed the dynamics of the downtown, because before we used to have a very busy road where almost 80% of the public transport lines would go through that street. Now it's a very different space. We have planted trees that you can see have grown, and it's a different environment now. And in 2022, rather from 2020 up to date, we started to see a very important revamping from the current administration of the state of Jalisco in their public transport policy. So there was a revamping of all of the fleet buses that have over 10 years of operations, and this new BRT line on the peripheral road, and the building of cycling infrastructure. Thanks to that, we have been able to consolidate a 290-kilometer network of cycling infrastructure. Guadalajara has gone through the urbanization process like many other cities. So you can see on the screen how it has grown since the 60s, in which we were still within the yellow ring, which is the Periférico, and it was seen as the main road or a highway for the city. But after that, the Periférico became part of the city. It started to become to be in the middle of the city, and instead of a highway, it became a roadway for freight transportation. What is the main problem we were able to identify in this area? Of course, we have the unmanaged, uncontrolled urbanization, people who came to live to this area, and there wasn't very good connectivity. So the Periférico became the way they connected to their workplace, to the service centers. There was an increase in motorization rates as well, because we saw more urban infrastructure and people started using their cars even more. And at the time, public transport wasn't enough to satisfy all of the needs and connect people to their neighborhoods that grew in this uncontrolled urban sprawl. Also, this inter-urban road connector has 350,000 trips per day in the interior circuit. And because it was unplanned, we see that there are no sidewalks. It can be very dangerous. We see on this photo people standing on the street. So no urban security or for the people. And also there were 528 old and dilapidated public transport units that polluted a lot. When we started to identify the problem, not only regarding mobility, but what other activities were impacted as well, we realized that there are university centers, educational centers, recreational, cultural centers, industrial centers, and neighborhoods. There are neighborhoods also in the exterior of the Periférico, where almost 600,000 people live. And to give you some background, this road connects to the main stadium of the city. So we can see a dynamism that required a new rearrangement, not only for the public transport, but also to create safer spaces for the commuters and people who need to go from one neighborhood to another. For example, they live on one side of the Periférico, but they need to cross it over for their work or for services. And there wasn't any awareness on this connection because it wasn't planned with any safety or security criteria. We were able to identify that the rate of accidents was also very high in this area. Also, as you can see, the Periférico is the light green line. It accounts for 42 kilometers back and forth, but it's not a closed circuit. What you see in the bolder green light shows how we have been able to connect traditional public transport, not with the BRT system, but now we were able to close the circuit to 60 kilometers. It also has between 80 and 120 centimeters of leeway, so this allowed us to provide a public transport road, but also a revamping of the urban areas. Also, it connects 4 of the 8 municipalities of the Metropolitan Area of Guadalajara, which are Guadalajara, Zapopan, Tlaquepaque, and Tonalá. And it also connects to other municipalities, for example, El Salto, where we have a very large industrial area. And it's an area that grew a lot due to the dispersion phenomena. Next slide, please. It's important to mention that everything we designed for Mi Macro Periférico is aligned with our governance and development plan with a 2030 vision. We were able to work it out on the 4th axis of sustainable territorial development, and especially axis 4.1 and 4.2. We really want to build a massive and public transport that is comprehensive and that will also allow us to guarantee more efficient and safer commutes. Together with this, we'll be able to create opportunities to encourage people to use public transport and not so much their personal vehicles. And now I'd like to give the floor to René Caro so that he can explain in more detail the project Mi Macro Periférico. Thank you. Thank you so much, Patty. So Patty has given us some background in a very clear way. So she explained the historical process and the transformation we have seen in this city regarding public transport, active mobility, and cycling infrastructure as well, the public cycling program, and all the steps we have taken to enjoy the mobility we have today. With the current administration, we were able to design a public policy for public transport called Mi Movilidad, which is a comprehensive model for mobility, and it takes into account the different pillars in which mobility and transport are intertwined. with the main cities, but also neighboring cities of the state. So we have the electric train, Mi Tren, the conventional roads called Mi Transporte. These are the bus lines that go through the cities. And the most important topic here that Patty mentioned, which is the improvement of the service provided by the traditional transport through a very ambitious program of revamping units. And this is our 5th year working on that with the administration. So all the buses need to have 10 years in operation. We also have very interesting programs such as women's participation as drivers. We also have programs that use a access card to the system. These are specifically used by women, heads of homes, to do their commutes. And this is just some examples of a long list of other programs. And the 4th pillar is Mi Macro, which accounts for the BRT system. And how Patty explained, we have 2 in the Macro Calzada, and the 3rd one is Mi Macro Periférico, which is the topic of our session today. So we took the peripheral issues and we worked on that. Next slide. The project methodology we used to address the issues for Mi Macro Periférico was organized in 4 main axes. First of all, we have transportation through this massive transport system with 52 kilometers of BRT, but also in articulation with the public cycling program and the creation of a cycling infrastructure in the corridor, in which we have 84 kilometers of cycling infrastructure on each side of the periférico. And this, of course, is connected to the cycling network we already have in the city. Also, we managed to regain public spaces that are next to the periférico. We thought that they could improve their situation, not only to improve the corridor, but also to make the urban space a bit more safer, nicer, because this was also a priority in our project. The 3rd topic has to do with urban regeneration, and with this corridor centered on transport, we were able to understand that this project could also be an alternative to the phenomena of urban dispersion, and we could bring together more people here around the massive public transport network that we're building in the city and not so much in these further away areas. And finally, the 4th pillar we used for methodology is landscape and environment. It was important to understand that this 52-kilometer circuit had a lot of potential regarding landscape, environmental services. So we designed the project as a huge green corridor or lineal park, 52 kilometers wide, through an extensive and ambitious revamp plan, and also opening new environmental services, for example, reforestation, for this project that surrounds the city. How did we manage to integrate the public transport system to Mi Macro Periférico? At the beginning of the administration, the public transport system was weak. And because we have this corridor surrounding the city, we were able to connect the electric trains from line 1 and 2. And then we have the first BRT line, Mi Macro Calzada, and line 3, Mi Macro Periférico, which was up to us and started running its operations in 2020. However, the BRT system, as Gonzalo mentioned, has the foundation of a corridor that runs through the Periférico and that is feeded through other transport lines, which are the lines that you see that cross over the Periférico. And we realized that's how we could build a network. So in the upper left side of the map, in the Zapopan area, and also in the southern area of the map, which is the municipality of Tlacomulco, which has grown a lot, and also in the eastern side, so to the right of the map, we were able to add complementary lines to this area. And I'd like to highlight two lines. The first green light you see to the right is the first electric line in Mexico, and it supplements the system to the eastern side of the Periférico, and to the west side we have the line number 4 of the electric train as well, which we are building at the moment, and we will inaugurate it next year. This is the orange line you see running to the south. So this is the right of 80 kilometers that we have. As Patty mentioned, we had a lot of leeway and we were able to add all of the elements we described and managed to go through from a urban highway with 2 roads and a lot of freight transport used to go through, and we managed to do now this specific 4-road way. So we have for personal vehicles, we have also the green ring. You can see we also have 3 lanes, and this green ring, which are sort of like a green walker, allowed us to also give a new sense of the urbanization. And finally, the final lanes that allow people to drive at a lower speed, and finally the cycling infrastructure, as well as the building of sideways and safety and security for pedestrians. It's also important to understand that the access of this corridor comes from the neighborhoods next to it, and they are also in charge of the security when it goes through their territory. And this is the blueprint of the stations. As Patty mentioned, we needed to understand that the stations was the epicenter of many situations that would happen with pedestrians or cyclists. So in this blueprint, we designed in these 80 meters, we were able to build sidewalks, universal safety, and safety side crosses. And this is how it looks like with its cycling infrastructure, which was very important. We also have the transfer base, which are the connecting points in which the buses make their stop and they can change lines. So these transfer bays is where people can transfer from line to line, and we can also offer different services. We have parking for bicycles, we have toilets and baby changers for mothers. We also have other services. For example, they can purchase the Mi Movilidad card and many other services, wardrobes, always with a vision of inclusion and gender perspective. So we were able to regain the public space. Sometimes we know that when people are commuting, they might have to wait a long time from one bus to another, or perhaps they are waiting for someone else. So the public design for these bays was very important, understanding first all of the needs of the users and the needs that have to do with security and comfort for the use of the space. Something very important in the design of this project was the visibility of the system, and we managed to do this through a very interesting project that managed to connect the different neighborhoods. First, we needed to define the name of the stations, and we asked the people how they understood their place, how would they recognize the area in which they lived. And this was a very interesting process because it allowed us to identify the usual ways people would take. So we were able to identify the routes and recognize the space and see where people would gather more. And this allowed us to develop maps, as you can see on the screen. And we collected more information as well regarding the points of destination. This also allowed us to strengthen the network of Mi Macro Periférico with the other BRT line systems and convention and traditional transport lines. So we took all that into account to provide a safety service. And this has been one of the most positive aspects, because we also took into account the elderly. How can they plan their route so that they can take the safest way and make sure that the mobility will guarantee safety to their destination. These are some photographs of the project already built. So this is one of the transfer bays we were able to build. We see the sidewalk, the lane, and the cycling lane as well. This is an air shot that we can see. This is the green ring that I was mentioning, where we will have a first station program. A very important element in the negotiation was the specific characteristic of Periférico in the construction process. It's a very busy lane, and that's why we needed to recognize that Periférico needed to operate in spite of the construction. And that's why we needed to make important decisions, for example, working nights to close the main lanes so that we could pave them. And once we had the center lanes free and paved, we would close the side ones so that we can build the stations. We knew we didn't have a lot of time to invade the other lanes with the building process, so the the station building took into account all of the materials so that it could be assembly in a warehouse, and at night we would just bring it in and put in the stations. Once we have the stations, we started with the lateral lanes, and this was very challenging because, as you can see to the left side, it was new. We didn't have side lanes in Periférico, so we needed to not only pave the road, but also build in all of the infrastructure that has to go underground. This was a very technical challenge that we managed to overcome. And thanks to the side lanes, we were able to solve the traffic problem we had. So we had these bottlenecks, and now thanks to these lanes, we were able to make it flow a bit better. And we also have the cycling lanes and, of course, the sidewalks for the pedestrians. So what are the outcomes of the project? I would say that today we have a stronger network for mobility and transport in the city. We have 3 electric rail lines. We have 3 BRT lines as well, and complementary routes and feeders of Macro Periférico, as well as the electric route to the east of the city. So 1 year after the operation, we have 90 million trips made. We have over 300,000 daily trips. In the first year, we set the record with over 300,000 daily trips. This also allowed us to have a 20% savings in travel time for our users. And this higher demand that we expected in our planning also made us add more units and buses for the main routes. So we have 18-meter buses for that.
Supuesto la necesidad de crear más rutas alimentadoras.
And now we see the need to have more complementary and feeder routes due to increased demand. So we are thinking of this extension, especially in the Zapopan region. These are more photos of the infrastructure already built, so you can see the rails and ramps through the bridges. There are also elevators, so it's very inclusive. These are the transfer bays. You can see the access to the stations and also a recycling waste system where people can throw away their garbage. There's also changing rooms for babies and families. We have biking parkings. So these are the 18-meter buses that we are also operating. And this is the access to the stations. The stations are operating, and all of the stations have solar panels. That's something I forgot to mention. So it's sustainable energy that is being used. And this is another station. Those are the stations that were built in warehouses and brought in at night. And so what are the next steps? What are we doing at the moment, and what will be the next steps for consolidating the mobility and public transport project? So we are building a new line, number 4. This will be an electric line, and it will start operations on the 2nd semester next year. We're also working on a new BRT line in the road and the highway to Chapala, which takes which goes to the airport, and we will also do an extension to line 1, so to the south, so that we can reach the industrial area. And finally, to the south, we see a red line, which is the extension of line number 1. There's also an extension of line 3. It's not on the slide, but we are working on the extension of line 3 in the municipality of Zapopan, which is to the upper left of the map. So as you can see, we continue to strengthen the network of public transport and mobility in the city. And this is the end of my presentation. Hopefully it was useful to you all. And if you have any questions or comments, let me know. Gonzalo, I don't know if you'd like to start. Yes, thank you so much, Rene. It was a pleasure to listen to you and to Patty about this project. I would like to commend you because it's truly a project that can be an example, and you can see it with the results. You had increased demand, and let me say, in Mexico, not in Mexico City, but in other cities, the demand wouldn't go up. It would just stay at the middle of what we projected in the planning. And here you have a very successful case because you have an increased demand only in the first year. So congratulations. We can see that the planning, the implementation process were very well thought out. And you mentioned it's the longest line of the country. So with this, I'd like to raise the first question from the chat from Doreen Duncan. And it has to do with how we started the presentation. So we have Rene, who works for the state and overlooks the work of the transport ministry, and Patricia Martinez on the other side, who works at Plan and has a lot of connectivity with other cities and mobility. So who was the implementing agency for this transportation infrastructure? We have city government, state government, and Plan that is not recognized by the Constitution in Mexico. So how did that go on, and how did you split costs between the various levels? So who'd like to start? Patty? Sure, of course. Let's start talking about funding, and then I'll go to the implementation. So the federal government had a specific budget for metropolitan areas. We had a bid, and each metropolitan area would submit a project that would have an impact. Unfortunately, this fund no longer exists. However, the Macro Periférico was one of the last projects to receive funding from this fund. So we received resources from this Metropolitan Fund provided by the federal government. I mentioned this because it was a good incentive for metropolitan areas to think about projects that would have an impact in the metropolitan areas. And it was also an incentive to work on designs, planning, and management of the cities, connecting all of the municipalities that are part of the metropolitan area and not to see it as silos. So it was a great thing to receive fundings from this Metropolitan Fund, and we received resources from the federal government, which was very interested in this project, as well as the private sector. Private sector invested in the revamping of the of the corridor so that we were able to have the new fleet. They also helped us in remodernizing the fleets with the new routes that are feeders of the Periférico and its public transportation. So that's how it was funded. Part of it came from a fund that doesn't exist, and the other part came from the state government, so from Jalisco. And this system also helped us to make more efficient the use of the resources for the execution or the implementation, because we basically built the stations in one place, and then we came at night to the Periférico and placed them there. That reduced cost. As for the institutional planning, a very positive aspect of this project is the interesting implementation method. We had the participation of different ministries from the state, but also municipalities. So the implementation stage was led by the Ministry of Infrastructure and Public Constructions. We did meet in a negotiation table where there was the Ministry of Transport, the Ministry of Infrastructure, Ministry of Environment, the Planning Metropolitan Center. We also had the CTUR, the urban transport, public transport system. We had government representatives. So we saw that it was a true priority for the government. And whenever any decisions had to be made or negotiations, everyone was present there. So there was a lot of participation, engagement, and a very meticulous management and leadership to know where to dedicate more time or not. Also, the implementation stage was very quick. I don't think we mentioned this, but our objective was to have the least impact on our citizenship. We didn't want to impact mobility as much, but we also needed to do it fast. We wanted to take into account the building aspect, the implementation aspect, not for public transport, but for reurbanization so that it could become a benchmark. Thank you, Patty. And for participants in the Caribbean, Africa, and other geographies, we see, and in Mexico, we see a lot of fragmentation within the governments and the different levels of government. So from the outside, we can see a very good partnership in your case, and I'm sure it has to do with the success of the project. And other elements from the outside that I can see, not because we are part of the STA, but because we think it's a very interesting work you're doing in the Mexican branch, and especially the design of the stations, of the bays. So Rene, can you tell us a bit more about how you made these decisions, thinking about the users? And I know that Rene, you were there at the office in Mexico City, and then you had to move to Guadalajara. So what did you think of all that and the regeneration design? And greetings to Michael King. We saw that he is here, and he is one of our inspirations to do this type of projects in Mexico. Thank you, Gonzalo. So I would say that we had several objectives set. So to turn a highway into a road, a safety road for people. Of course, it was very challenging because we needed to build from scratch everything. But when people are placed at the center of the decision-making process, we can have a better articulation in the project. And that's what happened. That's how we got organized. We knew that all decisions needed to be centered in efficiency, quality, but always thinking about the user. And so that's how we thought about the reforestation project. We also thought about the cycling infrastructure, also the stations with the specific components. And Patty mentioned that all stakeholders were at the table. We also had the Ministry of Inclusion and Gender, so they were always present. The Ministry of Sustainable Equality, and they were always commenting on small details. For example, why we used windows, transparent windows to guarantee more safety, or how they needed the stations to be covered. And so it was very interesting to have that point of view and to think about women where they can be seen in a public space. So all decisions were made taking into account everyone's point of view. That's why we have transparent crystals. We also decided on the ramps, the elevators, the changing rooms. All of those decisions were made collectively. And also, as Patty mentioned, time was of the essence. So we had 2 years to build it. So the 52 kilometers of paved lanes, cycling lanes, sidewalks, and 42 stations were built in 2 years, because our main objective was to affect the least the city and the users and to make it fast. And also one of the main challenges we had regarding public transport was because of the other projects we had in line, for example, the construction of line 4. And I must say that the pandemic came at a very good moment. Most of the construction was during pandemic, so we saw less pedestrians, less users, and this allowed us to go faster. So that was good, a positive, a silver lining. Thank you so much, Rene and Patty. So we are almost out of time. So I'd just like to thank you once again. You have shared very interesting elements. So I invite all the participants, and perhaps Ivona will manage to answer some of the questions. You can write to her directly as well. But it's important for you to know that this is the first time that we are planning a BRT system with the feeder lines, the public lines. So the planning process has been very interesting. We are writing a case study at the Sustainable Transport Award at ITDP. So if you're interested, you can find out more. And please feel free to write to Ivona, to Nora. We are very interested in promoting these types of solutions, to learn from these projects and to be able to implement them elsewhere. Thank you so much for joining us today, and greetings, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Hasta luego.
Thank you so much, Gonzalo, Rene,
Muchas
and
gracias.
Patricia.
Saludos a todas.
Please check out the STA Award website to be up to date with the next sessions. And we'll see each other very soon. Thank you.